Hey, Chris Salvatore here to talk about how to turn a movie idea into a treatment or outline. I think we've all been in this guy's position before, watching a movie on cable and thinking that we could probably do better than what's on screen. So maybe you get your ass up off the couch, or at least sit up, and start to think about ideas for the next big movie. You rack your brain, you think about it at every meal, on the can, driving, back on the can, and then maybe, just maybe, this happens. I love that look at the end. Like, of course I'm alive, you knucklehead. Now you have this brilliant idea for the next Hollywood blockbuster or Academy Award winner, and your imagination starts to run away with you. You're going to write it in like 4 weeks, sell it for millions of dollars, and move to Los Angeles. Or if you already live in Los Angeles, you're going to quit your crap ass waitering or FedEx Kinko's job or whatever, and you're going to start going to premieres, babes on each arm. Notice babes can be male or female, so I'm not being sexist, or maybe I'm being equally sexist. Well, first I have some advice. Get the fantasies out of your head. Relatively few spec scripts, those are scripts that are written for free that are sold on the market, are selling now, and for not a ton of money, although the market seems to be coming back a little bit. So if you're one of the fortunate few to sell them, the money is certainly nothing to sniff at. And as for the lifestyle, Entourage is a rarefied and glorified view of the business. If you work for or are friends with a movie star, I suppose your life could be like that, and the business aspects of Entourage were, I always felt, pretty authentic. But it's not all glitz and glam. In fact, it's very little glitz and glam compared to the work that's required. My point is that you have to love it, and that allows you to persevere. So this is not meant to dissuade you in any way. In fact, I want to encourage you. If you have a great idea for a movie, I think you should go for it. By it, I mean get to work. But by get to work, I don't mean bang out a script. It's a lot more involved and at times banal and tedious and incredibly frustrating than you might first imagine. Here's what I mean. First, think about why you want to write it and if you want to write it. If you want to write it to get noticed as a screenwriter and you don't necessarily see it as a big commercial movie, then I would suggest you write whatever you want. It can and probably should be as distinctive and interesting as possible. Those are the scripts that tend to get noticed and passed around by people because people in Hollywood are always trying to find new talent. And on rare occasions, those are the scripts that get handed off, and then maybe a big director or actor decides that he or she just has to do it, and it gets made, though not on a very large scale. But if you're trying to write a more commercial movie, then it's helpful to keep some things in mind. But I want to be clear about something. That doesn't excuse you, if you're writing a commercial movie, it doesn't excuse you from being passionate. You cannot be dispassionate about an idea and really have what it takes to see it through. And this process will certainly test your enthusiasm and your will. Okay, you've got your great idea. You can picture throngs of moviegoers turning out to see it. The problem, you have no story, no structure, maybe even no characters. That's okay. You're still in what I call the research phase or R&D phase. This is where you test your idea out. Think of it as the incubator or beta phase where you can try things without committing to them, letting them take shape in your head and perhaps on paper, but only in the most general ways. All the while you're figuring out if your idea truly has what it takes to move forward. First of all, what makes your idea special or distinct? Despite the crap that we can often generate, Hollywood is populated with thousands of people whose livelihood depends on coming up with the next big idea. You want your idea to be fresh, but not so fresh that it comes out of left field. There's a reason that no movie has ever been about, I don't know, a squid with psychic powers. Try to think ahead of the curve, but not too far ahead. If you're thinking about Harry Potter, you're behind the curve. Have you noticed how many dystopian movies starring young people there have been since the first Hunger Games came out? That's Hollywood. So is your idea a spin on the latest blockbuster? There are probably dozens of them in development right now, if that's the case. Does that mean you shouldn't do it? Again, no. I personally like to think in cycles. I don't feel like I'm smart enough to know when a trend is over. For instance, when the vampire or zombie or dystopian future trend is over. So if something hasn't been seen in a while, I kind of see movies as being cyclical, and audiences responding to something that hasn't been seen in a while. That then I tend to respond to it. When I argued for the studio I worked at to buy American Pie, I pitched it as the kind of movie that hadn't been done since Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Porky's. Similarly, I argued for Ladder 49 by saying that we hadn't seen a movie about firefighters since Backdraft. Look at movies that are coming out next year. You can use places like Box Office Mojo or even Google Movies for 2014, 2015. Does your idea fit into that universe? Also, keep in mind that a movie takes about 2 years from when it's greenlit, meaning agreed to be financed, and when it's released, so there's a long lead time. Talk to friends. Would they go see your movie? Of course, if your friends are agoraphobic drug addicts, they might not be helpful. But think of your friends as the audience. Talk to them about it, unless you think one of them is going to run off and write it. With that friend, I would tell him an intentionally awful idea. If you want, you can steal my squid with psychic powers concept. And if you're fortunate enough to know someone in Hollywood that you feel you can trust, talk to them about the idea. For feedback, not a sale. You're not going to sell anyone on an idea. If they spark to it and don't tell you that there are 75 just like it, you might be onto something. But here's where I give my only word of caution, because in my opinion, the stories about Hollywood stealing everyone's great ideas are for the most part overblown. Just be careful, because you can't register or copyright an idea. So that person could easily run off and pitch it to another writer who's starved for a big idea, as we all are. But they, of course, won't be able to execute it as well as you can, right? Next, and this is really important, who's your audience? Young kids, older people, women, men? Hollywood is increasingly looking for what are called 4-quadrant movies, ones that appeal to males and females over and under 25. That's why at times, or most of the time, blockbuster movies can seem like they're trying to be all things to all people. That's just because they are by definition. Now, in this process, don't worry about 4 quadrants when you're thinking about your audience, because then you'll just be up in your head and not create anything good. Despite seeming like a Philistine mercenary producer in these videos, I always keep in mind the first line of F. Scott Fitzgerald's short story, The Rich Boy. Begin with an individual, and before you know it, you find that you have created a type. Begin with a type, and you find that you have created nothing. But do think about who's going to see this movie, and is it a big enough movie to warrant the cost of what this movie would be? A big enough audience to warrant the cost of what this movie would be. You don't want to write, for instance, a giant sci-fi movie that will cost $150 million and appeal to octogenarians. Nor do you want a family movie that's an indie-style drama about a kid who's a serial killer, for instance. What's the tone? Think about analogous movies. Is it a combination of tones? And that's okay. There's a reason that people in Hollywood like to say it's such and such meets such and such. It might seem like BS, but that's the way people talk, and I personally find it to be a good exercise. Okay, here's a prescription. Still not writing. Number 1, think structure. Watch my video on basic movie structure. Think about 3 acts with special thought given to Act 2, which in my experience is the hardest act, and give particular emphasis to the middle of Act 2, where there should be a turn that will keep the second act in a form of acceleration. Secondly, watch movies. Now that you've determined your core audience, your genre, the tone, find movies that are analogous to the one you want to write. Pay particular attention to their structure. Is there a general structure they seem to adhere to? Is there one particular that you can be inspired by? You're not ripping anyone off by borrowing or being inspired by a structure. Number 3, read scripts. This is not an either or to the above. You, in my opinion, must do both. You are presumably writing this to be made into a movie, and so you must know how similar movies were executed on screen and how they did with audiences in the theaters. But you also must understand how a script reads. Hollywood is made up of very smart people who, when reading a script, are picturing a movie, but they are still reading. If your format and presentation stink and your prose is not entertaining, it just makes it that much harder. Lastly, read books about screenwriting. Any of these authors, Robert McKee, Blake Snyder, Christopher Vogler, are excellent. There are other authors and screenwriting books that are very good. I have found that if I'm struggling with a story or a script issue or doing notes for a writer, reading a book about screenwriting actually helps me to come up with ideas and problem solve. Maybe you've realized that your idea has been tried a million different ways and there's no use in trying again. Maybe you've realized that your idea has been tried, but you can do better. Awesome. Maybe you've realized that your idea is so fresh, so exciting that you just have to move forward. Fantastic. Now it's time to write a treatment or an outline. If there's a difference between the two, no one's told me, so I kind of use them interchangeably. And if there's an official format for a treatment or outline, no one has told me that either. I did a quick search of movie outlines on the web, and one article mentioned that to some, a treatment is a one-page concept document, which I find nowadays to be pretty useless. Unless you're close with a famous screenwriter and can email him or her this page and have him or her flip out and have to write it or pitch it, I don't think it's going to do you a lick of good. That's the first time I've ever used that phrase, a lick of good. I feel like I'm in the 50s. But a 2 to 5 page document as an initial draft of a treatment is a good place to start, in my opinion. You can lay in the structure that you've determined and begin to sketch in story ideas within that structure. That will lead you to the much more detailed document, which some would call an outline, but I still call a treatment, again interchangeable, from which you or someone you find can write the script. There are a lot of different ways to go about writing a treatment. I'm just going to give you one way. Let's start with a 2 to 5 page treatment. It might be helpful to view this as a kind of fly paper for ideas. It's a document that you can add to while you're thinking of ideas while driving around, showering, working out, etc. First off, it's helpful to put your concept down, i.e., what the story's about. But in my opinion, it's as important to articulate what the movie's about, thematically, philosophically, culturally, etc. What are you saying about humanity, human nature, the world in this movie? This could easily sound ridiculous and you might want to delete it as soon as you write it, but I recommend being able to articulate it, if not to others, then at least to yourself. Unless you have it so set in your head, it'd probably be helpful to start with a character breakdown. Who are your main characters? What are their backstories or histories? What do they want in life and in the story? How do they intersect with, conflict with, complement one another? Now, point of emphasis, conflict is probably the most important word to keep in mind when writing a movie. Does your character get put in a place that he doesn't want to be? How does he get out of the situation? What does he want? And who and what will get in the way of this want? Okay, you have your character breakdown. Before you begin to put in story ideas, I would literally type your structure in so that you're adding your story ideas into that structure. Act 1, Act 2, middle of Act 2, end of Act 2, Act 3. You can move them around as you see fit, the scenes, the ideas, see what's working, what's not. All right, you done? Awesome. Stop. Now, in my opinion, is when you register with the WGA. You have enough detail you want to protect, and that way if you have a bad breakup and your significant other decides to take your work around town, you've at least papered your ownership of certain elements. Google WGA register outline and it'll take you to the appropriate place depending on whether you're in the West or in the East, WGA West or WGA East. You put in information like outline and social security number, address, etc. It's $10 for members, $20 for non-members, and you'll get an email certifying that you registered. I personally think it's worth it, though remember, I'm not that paranoid about this stuff. Additionally, if you're not intending to write it and have someone in mind, this could be when you send it out. In my opinion, this is when you'll have enough detail to stoke someone's creative fires, but not so much that the person would feel like you've already made all the decisions. Done? Okay, proceed. Now we move to the full treatment phase. I'd recommend keeping those structural markers in place, as you did with the 2 to 5 page document, but that's up to you because you've completed the other document. you probably have the structure embedded already in the narrative. Now, with this phase, you can go into as much detail as you want. Scenes, slivers of scenes, bits of dialogue, description, basically things you want to catch for when you actually write the script. At this point, it's going to seem like a ton of work, but keep going. Believe me, you will be glad you have certain things figured out when you go to script. And if they don't work when you go to script, you can change them. I find this phase actually to be very freeing. There's something about not writing in the script format that makes it feel less pressured, I guess. Okay, so you're done with the long outline. I'm well aware of the bitter irony that the shortest part of this video will actually take you the longest. But once you're done with this, I would register this document as well, because now you have far more detail than the 2 to 5 page outline that you registered, and you want to protect those new details. Essentially, you will have the pieces in place and will have essentially gone over the movie so many times in your head and on paper that you'll be ready to write the script. So congratulations, celebrate for like an hour or two, and then get to work writing your brilliant screenplay. Okay, takeaways and to-dos. Here's the general breakdown. Idea phase. What's your goal for this? Are you writing the script to get noticed? Are you ultimately going to hand off the idea? Research phase, R&D. Research what's coming out next year, talk to friends, figure out your genre and audience. More R&D, think about structure, watch analogous movies, read scripts, read books. Short treatment, 2 to 5 pages. Think of it as fly paper for ideas, and when you're done with that, you register the document. At that point, if you're not planning on writing it, you might consider sending it to a screenwriter. Next phase, full treatment, 15 to 30 pages, but it could be, probably not going to be less, but might be more than 30 pages. Scenes, dialogue, description, visuals, anything, and register this document when you're done, and then you're ready to go to script. Congratulations, best of luck with everything, and thanks for watching. Please look for more videos.